resolved. Human ingenuity will overcome climate change. With that, I call this debate to order. I don't have a gavel, but I'll clap my hands. And I'm looking for a speech in the affirmative. And as I have told you before, the fix is in. I already know who the first four speakers are going to be, but after that, I don't know. So our first speaker in the affirmative is Kay Halpern. Kay, please unmute yourself and give us your speech of no more than 4 minutes.
Okay, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just to start off with a tiny bit of humor, I am wearing actual lipstick for this debate instead of Zoom lipstick because Zoom doesn't do that anymore. So anyway, so I'm not an engineer or an expert, but I remain very hopeful about human ingenuity. And the very first project I was assigned when I started my job 30 years ago, my international affairs job, was looking at an interagency committee that was tasked with promoting US exports of renewable energy technologies. And at the time, I didn't even know what renewable energy technologies were. So I went on several field trips nearby to here in Maryland to look at a PV plant that made solar panels, and farther afield to California, where I looked at PV, a passive solar installation in the Mojave Desert, geothermal, microhydro, wind turbines, and more. And since then, those technologies have dramatically improved, and the cost, especially for PV panels, have come way down. And innovation continues in terms of power generation. In addition to solar and wind and geothermal and so on, there are other technologies like modular, very small modular nuclear reactors, like wave technology from the ocean. And this isn't renewable energy technology, but it kind of gave me more faith in human ingenuity. Just last week on 60 Minutes, they had a segment with featuring engineers from Louisiana who invented a very simple way to clean up a huge oil spill in the Gulf. And in addition to energy technologies, there's other ways, other approaches to overcoming climate change. So that would be, for example, land use, carbon sequestration, changing the way we produce and supply food, and minimizing food waste, pasturing livestock without cutting down trees, refrigeration management, energy efficient buildings and vehicles, and urban planning and local sourcing to minimize transportation use and costs, including energy costs. And we also shouldn't discount policy approaches, such as a carbon tax to capture the true cost of fossil fuels, and working with fossil fuel companies to encourage them to open renewable or carbon neutral divisions, which some of them had, and they had solar divisions until the political climate became less advantageous for that. And geothermal actually, as I discovered, is a natural for oil and gas companies because it uses a lot of the same types of equipment. And another thing that we should encourage, our current economic system encourages planned and perceived obsolescence, which is really wasteful and uses a lot of excess energy. And we should look at ways to minimize that, which will.
Kate, okay. You're at almost 4 minutes, so please wrap it up. I know it's really difficult.
So my most important point, if we give up on ingenuity, we will lose the will to come up with new innovations. We will lose the battle before it's even fought. So we can't give up.
And with that, our first speaker our first courageous speaker, because it does take courage to be one of the first speakers, is appreciated. And now looking for a couple of questions for this speaker. And at this point, you can either let the whips know, who will let me know, or you can raise your electronic hand. Probably at this point, more efficient to raise your electronic hand if you would like to ask a question. I shall at this point call on the usually incredibly shy Davidowinski. David, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Mr. Chair, I would like you to ask the speaker if she thinks that the drive of human ingenuity to solve this challenge will come primarily through private enterprise encouraged by the profit motive, or if it must come from government funding that will have a completely different and often political aspect to the funds. Thank you.
Thank you. And admirably asking a question rather than sneaking in a speech, only a little tiny speech in there. Admirably done. Yes, speaker, please answer the question.
Okay, well, first I want to acknowledge David, who is a good friend of mine. And I really do appreciate the question. It's an excellent question. And I think balance is a key principle here. So I think it can come from both. It can come, certainly we want to encourage innovation, that human drive for innovation, which often comes from the private sector. But I think if there is not, we are kind of in an existential situation here with climate change. That is my view. And so I think there also can be a role for government as well, but I wouldn't want the government role to crowd out human ingenuity and private innovation.
Thank you. Thank you. And we will take one more question for this speaker. Michael Schneider, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
The question doesn't seem well defined to me. I'm wondering if the speaker thinks that we're actually going to halt melting of the ice caps and rising of the seas, or does she even think that we will reverse that trend?
Well, if I knew the answer to that question, I wouldn't be human. I'd be a heck of a lot more powerful than me or any one of us. I think we have to act as if we have the possibility to change, because human innovation sometimes happens in leaps and bounds. And I think Malcolm Gladwell in some of his books, wrote about, when something just sort of takes off and catches fire. And change can sometimes, you get incremental, and then things can just happen very quickly. And so it may seem, that sort of thing may seem impossible now, but who knows? I mean, there was a large hole in the ozone, what was it, 10, 20 years ago, or maybe more years ago. And I think we managed to close that. So I remain hopeful.
Thank you. Thank you to the speaker. Jazz hands is how we express appreciation in these debates on Zoom. And also to the questioners who actually asked questions. Wonderful, wonderful, great start. And with that, the speaker is thanked, and we will now go to our next speech, which will be a speech in the negative. David Froba, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Please unmute yourself and give your speech of 4 minutes or less.
Okay, thank you. I usually find myself on the positive of these debates, but not today. I'm passionately concerned about global warming. And that is the reason I do not believe that ingenuity is going to resolve the problem. Ingenuity is not primarily what we need. What we need is building the political will to do something, recognize that the solution will require a lot of sacrifice on all of our parts, and having the will to do it. We should not be counting on some great scientific breakthrough, no pie in the sky. There are a number of books showing that we have the technology to deal effectively with global warming now, using current technology. The problem is we're not using the technology. We're just diddling around with things like bike lanes, biofuels, and recycling our cans and bottles. Things that make us feel good and do very little to solve the problem. They give a false sense of security. What we need are to do things like public transportation, high density cities. These are things that do not necessarily make us feel good, but they really do something to solve the problem. People would rather have a car than public transportation, but that's not going to work out in the long run. Many people would prefer to have a single home somewhere, but if you do that, you're not going to be able to solve the problem. A couple of examples. There's a system called bus rapid transit, which functions exactly like a subway. Just picture a subway, but a bus on surface streets, dedicated lanes. It goes right through the intersections, electronically controlled. It can move anytime very quickly and effectively. It's relatively cheap and relatively easy to do and fast to do. On the production of energy side, from what I understand, everybody that's talking about a solution to the production of energy is talking about nuclear power. There is simply no other existing solution to have reliable power. Solar, wind are great, but they're not going to resolve all of the energy needs of the world. The political will, that's the difficult one. And particularly in the United States right now, the climate is such that it's very, very difficult to do anything politically. If one side wants to do it, the other side's not going to want to do it, no matter who comes up with the idea first. I think, unfortunately, the only way that we're going to reach political will, at least in the United States, and perhaps in the rest of the world, is that things are going to have to get worse before they get better. And I think that what's likely to happen is that within the next 10 years or so, people will start to realize that they've got assets in all the coastal cities of the United States, and they're going to start losing value. You have all this tremendous amount of residential, commercial, and industrial properties, and people are going to start realizing, particularly the people who have the money and the opportunity to think things through, they're saying, no, we're not going to build another hotel in Miami. You know, we'll go to Atlanta, we'll go to somewhere else. So I'm afraid that may be what might happen, and if it does, it will produce a depression, and then people will start thinking about doing something about it. Thomas Edison famously said that genius is 1% inspiration and 90% perspiration. I think we need to start to sweat. Thank you.
Right on time. Very, very well done. I'm going to ask. Oh, well, I asked the crew to mute everybody and they muted me too. Okay. So please remember, everybody should be muted except speaker and questioner. Jazz hands for our second courageous speaker. And I'm now looking for a questioner for a couple of questions for this speaker. And I see David Newman. David, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Well, coming into this debate, I didn't know whether I was pro or con, and I guess I'm con because I agree very much with the speaker's position, but I think we need to go farther. It is a problem of will and willpower, and it's going to require agreements and a will to actually follow through on the agreements. Agreements are being made as
David, I'm really listening here for a question.
Yes.
I'm listening for a question.
Yeah, so I'd like to ask the speaker, does he think that the actions which are being pledged in Glasgow at the moment will be followed through by enough nations in order to prevent us from overrunning our carbon budget in the next 6 to 7 years, which is all the time we have left, if we try to keep burning fossil fuels at the rate we're going now?
Unfortunately, I doubt it. I mean, there's talk about reaching a 50% reduction in carbon pollution within the next 10 years. That's absolutely ridiculous. We're nowhere near close to that. The United States has been producing about the same amount of global warming gases for the last 10 years at least. It did go down a little bit during the epidemic, but not much. And even worse, the world production of greenhouse gases is just on a trajectory like that that's been the same for the last 20 years, has not gone down at all. We are not doing anything. It's hard to believe that something's going to happen in the future if it's not happening now.
Thank you. Thank you. And we have Rachel Baker. Please unmute yourself and ask your question of the speaker through the chair, of course.
I would like to hear from the speaker about what he thinks if we need motivation toward a level of willingness to sacrifice comforts, what he thinks would help motivate people in that direction.
As I say, I think the most that's going to motivate people is suffering, unfortunately. It's already started to happen here in California. You've got, with the fires, people are having a great deal of difficulty getting insurance, fire insurance, which means that a lot of places in California, the property has lost value. Now, those people are perhaps motivated. And I think that unfortunately, that's what's going to take. I want to add one thing, which I missed. Certainly, putting everything we can into getting nuclear fusion power plants is worth the effort. I mean, that's one place. If we could possibly do that, it would be the greatest thing that's happened since fire.
And with that, the speaker is thanked, as are the questioners. Thank you very much, everybody. We will now move to a 4-minute speech in the affirmative. Beth Mallow, please unmute yourself and give your speech.
Mr. Debate Chair, thank you. I think a critical piece of this debate is how we define human ingenuity. One definition is the way human minds creatively think and work to find solutions to problems. And that's perhaps the definition we all go to first when we hear that term. We think about the engineer, the scientist, the inventor. I'm personally inspired by my dad, a scientist who worked on the Manhattan Project at Oak Ridge, Tennessee in the 1940s, leading to the creation of the atomic bomb, which ended World War II. And I'm equally inspired by my son, a chemical engineering student who set up a carbon capture unit in his room this summer. Their stories, combined with the perpetual optimist that I am, has shaped me into believing that human ingenuity is alive and well and will solve the problem of climate change. And yes, we're going to need some fairly sophisticated inventions for powering our world, including alternative sources of energy. We're also going to need economic ingenuity, such as putting a price on carbon to incentivize companies to invest in renewables over fossil fuels. But I would argue that human ingenuity and climate change also relates to the challenge of staying optimistic in the face of barriers and being effective in convincing others that climate change is a problem to be solved, not a hopeless situation. The best inventions for climate change are meaningless if we don't talk about them or invest in them or implement them because we don't understand them or we associate them with a certain politician or movement, or we are concerned that it will alter our way of life. It's kind of like the COVID vaccine. It loses its impact if half of the population won't take it due to a fear of side effects or concerns about government overreach. So this aspect of human ingenuity, communication, we're still focused on finding solutions to problems, yet it emphasizes how we talk with each other and how we move beyond binary choices. Can we protect the environment and still have our air conditioning and create more jobs along the way? I believe the answer is yes, but it's far easier to engage our Uncle Fred at Thanksgiving in a conversation around football than it is around electric vehicles or batteries or carbon taxes. But we need to engage in those conversations until we're no longer afraid of them, and even get to find them exhilarating, like talking in a Braver Angels debate is. As a scientist, I'm committed to getting better at communicating my message and helping the public get better at digesting what we read and hear. And that Braver Angels aspect of human ingenuity, how we talk with each other, I view it as the biggest barrier to combating climate change and the greatest opportunity to keeping our optimism. To sum up, we need to harness all aspects of human ingenuity, engineering aspects, economic aspects, and engaging others in this all hands on deck moment to solve climate change and to make our way of life even better. Mr. Debate Chair.
Lovely job of fitting within the time frame. And now I'll bet that whoever I call on to ask the first question will do an equally great job of actually asking a question. And so Susan Simmons, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
So I totally agree with your view of human
Please address the chair.
Oh, I'm sorry. I totally agree with the view of human ingenuity, but I would like to ask the speaker, what do we do about developing political will? Because without that, all the ingenuity in the world doesn't matter.
It's a great question. And I would say along the lines of the comments I just made that communicating with others, seeing their points of view, embracing what we do at Braver Angels makes a huge difference. I listened today to a podcast on clean, renewable energy, and they didn't even mention climate change. It was a Republican podcast, and I was so impressed. One of my friends, Jan, sent it to me, and it was really great because we didn't even get into the politics. It was focused on business. So figuring out what our colleagues, what our friends, what our neighbors, what our relatives want to hear, what our congresspeople want to hear, where their values are, and putting things in terms of those values. I think that's how we create the political will, and we all work together in the same direction to solve this really critical, I agree, existential issue of our times.
All right, asked and answered. And now looking for another question. And I see Joel Stan. Please unmute yourself and ask your question, Joel.
The question I have for the speaker is, why do you assume that global warming is valid? I did a Google search based on the search terms Google climate change facts fraud. Came up with dozens and dozens of articles with lists of facts that show that so-called climate change and global warming has been a 30 or 40-year fraud perpetrated on the American people. So this whole debate to me
Well,
is
thank you. Thank you. You have asked your question. And if you would like the opportunity to make a speech later, please let us know. So we have our question.
So thank you for going to the internet and looking, and I would love to engage you more at another time. I will say, I'd like you to go and look at what's happened over the last 800,000 years, because if you look at the last 40 years, 50 years, you can make arguments about trends up and down. But if you go back and look at what's happened, we're above 400 parts per million now. We're higher than we've ever been in the history of this planet, as long as we've been able to keep records. And we can go back a really long time by looking at ice and other things. So the idea is that if you look at all of the things on the internet and you read all of the literature critically, you'll find that about 97% of scientists agree that climate change is real, and there's a lot of evidence for it. There's still 3% that may disagree, like on any issue. But I think it's a very compelling argument that's building up. And the IPCC, which I'd encourage you to look at, they're meeting right now in Glasgow, has taken the strongest possible arguments and put forth the strongest possible data ever in all of the reports they've been doing over the last few decades. So look at the 800,000 year history, and you'll see it's more than just cycles. It really does seem to be a clear man-made increase in carbon dioxide since the Industrial Revolution.
And so many thanks to the speaker and the questioners. Excellent speech, excellent questions. And we will now move on to our last preset speaker in the negative, Cliff Swigit. I don't think you're surprised to hear me call on you. Please unmute yourself and give your 4-minute speech or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you to all the speakers so far. It's great to be here. I just wanted to, I wanted to start by imagining that we're all together on this big ocean liner, and it's been an amazing cruise. But the navigator comes along and he tells us we're on a collision course with a deadly reef that's just over the horizon. And to avoid it, we need to change course. And this ship that we're on is big with immense inertia. If we don't start steering now, we'll inevitably hit the reef with catastrophic consequences. So would any of us question the need to act? Would any of us, if asked to help turn the wheel, hesitate to step up? And I'm actually quite confident that each one of us would do what was needed to avoid the reef. And I doubt any of us would suggest that we wait or think that an ingenious idea would let us stay the course so that we could get back to enjoying the cruise. And climate change, grappling with climate change, I feel is very much like steering the biggest ocean liner imaginable. We've known for over 100 years that increased greenhouse gases in our atmosphere will inevitably warm the surface of the Earth. We've also known for decades that burning fossil fuel is increasing carbon dioxide in our atmosphere 100 times faster than at any time in human history. And like a chart used by a navigator, the Keeling curve shows us that greenhouse gases have risen to dangerous levels and continue to rise. We're on course for catastrophe. The consequences of these greenhouse gases are heat waves, droughts, fires, floods, extreme weather, species die-off, water shortages, sea level rise. What we're seeing today is just the beginning. What we really don't want to do is hit that reef. So I've spent my career in tech innovation, where every day we rely on ingenuity to solve really hard problems. Ingenuity is thriving in our modern age, driving innovation, reshaping our human experience in ways we never could have imagined. But ingenuity cuts both ways. The fossil fuel industry has been ingenious in increasing oil and gas production, while it employs ingenious lobbying and PR tactics to cast doubt on climate science and delay the transition to clean energy. Financial engineers have been ingenious in creating carbon offset markets that will never deliver the promised greenhouse gas reductions. Traditional auto manufacturers have been ingenious in moving Americans into ever larger gas-guzzling SUVs and trucks. So ingenuity alone will not overcome climate change. Instead, we need to take purposeful action individually and at every level of society to prioritize and address this climate crisis. And like steering that ocean liner, we need to act now before it's too late. So as individuals, everybody on this Zoom call, there are powerful and practical ways each of us can act today to start to steer the ship. And I just wanted to share a few of the many examples. You can switch to an electric vehicle. 1/3 of US greenhouse gases come from filling up at the pump. But EVs are more fun to drive, they're lower maintenance, they're more reliable. You quit paying for gas, and you can buy a used Nissan Leaf for under 10,000 bucks. You could heat and cool your house with an electric heat pump. So rather than burning gas or oil, you can use clean electricity and get up to 600% efficiency. They're kind of like magic. Beef and dairy generate about 14% of our global greenhouse gas emissions. So maybe think about trying alternatives like Beyond and Impossible burgers. They taste great. So do plant-based milks like almond, oat, and soy. You can also sell your investments in fossil fuel stocks. Instead, invest in the thousands of clean energy companies that are growing fast.
Cliff, I have to ask you to wrap it up.
Okay, so I'm going to say one last paragraph, Paul. Changing course is hard. We're creatures of habit, but many generations before us have risen to address great challenges. Our great challenge is climate change. So let's not let this amazing ocean liner hit that reef. Let's take the actions that we can take to steer the ship today.
Okay, thank you, speaker. So now looking for questions for the speaker. Marta Nieves, please unmute yourself and ask your question of the speaker.
I appreciated what the speaker spoke about, but I have a question, and that is, what role do you feel young people can play in moving us forward to solve this crisis that we're in?
Thank you for that question. I think young people can play so many different roles in both helping all of us see that change is possible, because I think the younger generation is willing to try new things and is willing to accept things as they are, maybe not as they hope they would be. I also think that young, nimble minds who are heading off into the world and into the workforce, whether they be engineering and science or communicators or hard workers or working in the trades, can contribute to a new way of life that's climate friendly. So I get so much inspiration and hope from the younger generation, because I think they will ultimately help us show the way.
Thank you. Thank you. Michael Snare, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
All right, well, first I'd like to say I agree very much with what the speaker had to say. My understanding of the topic here, I thought, had to do with the idea of whether we rely on private enterprise and human ingenuity, or whether we need to take, governmentally based action. And I'd like to hear the speaker talk about any specific governmental actions he thinks we should take, and future speakers on this call as well, particularly those on the conservative side.
Thank you for that question. I think that there is an absolute risk of over-regulation on the part of the government that could squelch innovation and ingenuity, which is the heart of this discussion. But having said that, for all the folks who've looked at the economics of climate change, we have what we called an unpriced externality, which basically means we can burn these fossil fuels and not pay for the damage that's done. So the free market is not working towards a solution in the way that it could if the pricing was accurate. And so I feel that without some well-designed, light-handed government policies that tilt the playing field towards clean energy, we will never get there. So I think it's a combination of recognizing the power of the free market, but also recognizing that the economics don't work because of these unpriced externalities. So to answer your question, I think it's both. You know, we need the private sector, we need the public sector.
Thank you. Thank you. Exemplary speech, exemplary questions. Well done. Well done indeed. So we now go off of our preset list of speakers. We're going out into the wilds now of the debate world. And Ethan Abelman, please unmute yourself. I'm sorry, we are now cutting back to 3-minute speeches. So take a deep breath, recalibrate. All speeches will be 3 minutes or less now. And Ethan, go ahead, unmute yourself and give your speech, please, in the affirmative, I believe.
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Beautifully.
Excellent. I'd say I had to choose, but I'd say I'm more neutral on the resolution. But I just sort of wanted to speak as someone who I think will probably be affected, at least visually, more than most people on this call. And as someone who's somewhat familiar with some psychological work around the issue of climate change. I agree with the previous speaker in many ways, and that particularly the point about human ingenuity cutting both ways. But I take issue with one with the sailing towards the reef metaphor, because if we were indeed sailing towards a reef, we would in fact change course. But really, it's more like we're sailing very, very slowly into slightly more turbulent waters. It's only a little bit more turbulent than the last mile, but it gets worse and worse and worse. And that's the problem with this issue. Climate change is too big to get your head around. We are just not good as humans at thinking about the way that small actions that build up can affect a system like the global climate. It's just not how we're wired. We don't know where our water comes from when we turn on the tap, let alone understand how, turning on a stove might impact, ice caps in 100 years. And that's the fundamental issue with this, with the climate crisis. We don't see the results of our actions, and that's on a micro scale, but even more so, it's on a macro scale. It's really hard to convince anybody to say, put a tax on carbon when in the short term it will, probably have some negative economic consequences. And in the long term, I guess it'll do something, but like we don't see it. We don't see it. We're starting to see it, but it's not gonna, so you get what I'm saying. I guess my point here is that, I'm not arguing for a specific policy here. I'm just trying to shed light on the real issue with the climate crisis, right? It's not like other issues that we face in society. How are we going to address this problem if we can't even get our heads around it, right? I believe that human ingenuity will, end up saving us, from, catastrophic, if tidal waves coming, now, okay, we're going to start building some infrastructure, but will it be too late, right? Yes, there's going to be climate refugees. There's going to be places that are going to become uninhabitable. The human race isn't going to get wiped out. There'll be increasing inequality. And I've sort of accepted that that's what's going to happen.
Ethan, I've got to ask
sort
you
of
to
how
wrap it up.
Yeah, so that's just, I just wanted to put out how I'm thinking about the issue and what I expect to see in my life in 50 years or so.
Thank you, and thank you for a different perspective. John Dykers, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Mr. Chairman, would you ask the speaker if he's not at least a little bit encouraged by since we're the ones causing the climate change, we seem to be agreed about anthropomorphic climate change. If he's not encouraged at all by the falling birth rates in Japan, China, Russia, the European Union, the United States, and maybe not everywhere that we'd like, but at least those major changes are already starting to take place, if that encourages him.
Thank you for a very clear question.
On the subject of birth rates, I wouldn't call myself an expert in that area, but my understanding of global population trends is that most developed countries, the birth rates are slowing, and most developing countries, the birth rates are still relatively high. And the UN has projected, that will plateau somewhere around, the low teen billions. Look, we still need to accommodate a bunch of people on this planet. And I guess I don't know. I'm not encouraged if the Thanos snap is what our solution is supposed to be here, yeah, I'm not sure I can offer too much insight into that necessarily.
Thank you. And we'll take one more question for the speaker. Catherine Furlani, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Oh, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, I would like if you would ask the speaker if he would say something about what it seems to me he was talking a lot about. We might be oversimplifying what the situation is, and that might be a lot of the mindset that people have. Is he saying something like that it's complex and more broad, and we just have not, as individuals in this society, understood all those complexities? Is my question clear?
Yeah, it's a really great question, and I'm happy to talk about that a bit. I definitely think that it's sort of like, at least in a lot of the media coverage I hear, it's like, climate change isn't a problem, it's not human caused, or like, we're gonna all be underwater in 20 years. We're not all gonna be underwater in 20 years, right? And we're not all gonna be underwater really at any point. But that's not to say there aren't already going to be severe consequences, right? So I just it's one of these things where, like, I don't know the answer for how we can better understand what the consequences are going to be and how we can better think about that. I don't understand it. I know that things are bad and they're going to get worse. I don't necessarily know how it's going to affect me. I'll probably be fine because I'm well off and have a stable job and I can move somewhere else. It's probably not going to affect me. Yeah, I completely agree. It's an important point to highlight that I return again to the idea of how do we get our heads around the fact that we are in the boat and the waters are slowly getting worse and worse and worse. And at some point we got to do something about it, but it's got to be mitigation. It's going to be dealing with it. Maybe we, are we going to be able to hammer out a new type of bow that's better in time? It's like, it's messy.
And with that, thanks to the speaker and the questioners. And we will now move on to a speech in the negative. Bruce Moreland, please unmute yourself and give your 3-minute speech.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for this opportunity. I need to start off by telling you that my background really gives me the chops to explain the science of global warming. Even though I'm a conservative, I got to work on global warming back in the 80s under the model as it was being used for nuclear winter. So I've always understood how the models work. So when they returned to explain global warming, I was pretty quick to adopt that as a position that we needed to deal with. And of course, I am an optimist. Human ingenuity is going to need help. Like the first speaker, I believe in human ingenuity, especially as it expresses under free markets. I've long embraced the substitution effect, for example, which is why we no longer have a whale oil shortage, thanks to human ingenuity. Meanwhile, Hayek, who's the economist that all the really advanced free market conservatives like to quote, so including me, he wrote a book called The Road to Serfdom, in which he gives us permission to constrain markets through government actions to deal with the negative externalities, also known as tragedies of the commons. And these are what happen when free markets allow bad side effects to be billed to third parties. And fossil-based energy releasing CO2 is a textbook example of a negative externality that we're going to deliver the bill to our children and grandchildren. So we have to correct the unconstrained market. One example that is favorably looked at by conservatives is a border-adjusted carbon fee and dividend. This is the one that most economists support. It's the least damaging to the economy. It basically is a high liberty, low regulatory start, and it unleashes human ingenuity in ways that a set of command and control regulations cannot. Analytics suggests that a well-structured carbon fee and dividend will actually outperform any other methods, including vague promises, as in the Kyoto Accords. The analytics that I have looked at said that if we could pass a simple thing like that, we can have this high freedom, low regulatory approach and reach the kinds of goals that we think we need to reach. But somebody talked earlier about the political problem, and a solution like that does have the huge silver bullet effect of taking care of the political problem because it breaks the log jam. Because we are far enough down the pipe that we're going to need what we call silver buckshot to solve this problem, which means we're going to need people pushing for cars, we're going to need people pushing for more efficient housing, we're going to need everything on the table. And so in a way, I'm saying I really believe that human ingenuity can help us, but only if we let the free markets start looking for those solutions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. 3 minutes on the dot. Now I'm looking for a question for the speaker, and David Newman, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Oh, okay. Does the speaker acknowledge that these externalities are something that the fossil fuel industry in particular, and other industries as well, have been lying about for an extended period of time, at least 30 to 40 years, and they have created a mindset in the public that it's all right to keep on using these resources and that we don't need to worry about the consequences.
Well, thank you for that question. I like to think of myself as a problem solver. What do I want to say? I don't like to fix blame. I like to fix problems. So yeah, we could look into the notes and see that the fossil fuel industries had led us astray. But in a command and control economy, the government makes those kinds of mistakes all the time. And only in a free market can we hope to overcome the kinds of things that rent-seeking industries get when they go to the center of power and use political power to get their solutions selected rather than letting markets do the solutions. So I don't think that it's germane to the problem that there was an attempt to hide the evidence within the industry.
Thank you. And I will now go to David Messina. David, please unmute yourself and ask your question. David, I'm sorry, Dan.
Okay.
You're
Yes.
muted.
Hi. Hi. So I have two quick questions, which I think will result in two quick answers.
One. You only get one.
All right. Okay. What are the benchmarks, metrics, or statistics to determine when the problem of climate change is solved? How do we know we are in the safe zone?
Boy, that's a really good question, because that's the question I ask all the time down at my meetings when I'm trying to figure out what we're going to be doing, and nobody knows how they're going to tell if we've done it or not. I think that one of the reasons I'm optimistic and pessimistic is I think we're going to have some of the silver buckshot that we're going to need is going to be pulling carbon out of the atmosphere so we can get back down to a number that makes sense. And one of my favorite solutions is regenerative agriculture, which can sequester carbon faster than anything else. And it improves the soil. I'm a planning commissioner in a rural community, and we can sequester carbon, we can improve the soil, and all of that happens as part of the silver buckshot of the solution. So whether 350 is the right number, I always tell people, once you discover that there's a thermostat in the room, you have to take on the responsibility of setting it. And we have now discovered, to our chagrin, and we discovered this, by the way, back in the 1800s and rediscovered again in 1926 when we did the first hardcore calculations. So this is an old problem. And the fact is the government way back when was making the wrong solutions. It was helping us become addicted to this fossil fuel. And when I was a teenager, I could eat 6 burgers a day and it was good for me. But now that I'm not a teenager, I can't eat 6 burgers a day. And it's the same with fossil fuel. We needed fossil fuels to get to the kind of society with freedoms that we have today. But it's time to wean ourselves off that and go back to more sustainable agricultural and travel and other things like that. So I hope that answered your question. I didn't really have a number.
Thank you. Many thanks to the speaker and the questioners. And yep, kudos, jazz hands. And we will now move on to what I believe is going to be a nuanced set of comments, perhaps a little bit more in the affirmative from Ray English. Ray, please unmute yourself and give your 3-minute or less speech.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So I have a lot of agreement with many things that have been said, starting out with Kay and David and Beth, Cliff, Ethan, and also especially with Bruce. If I think about this problem, the problem is greenhouse gas emissions. They need to be reduced. And the sources of greenhouse gas emissions come from every area of our economy and every area of the global economy. So that's electricity, it's transportation, it's agriculture, it's industry, it's our own individual homes. So we need individuals to change. And many are, but many aren't. Many don't have a clue. We need communities to change. I come from a small community that has a very active climate action plan. Down the street, just 10 miles, there's a community that's much more conservative and they don't have a clue. We need corporations to change. And we see some corporations making commitments to net zero by 2050. And other corporations who are maybe pulling the wool over our eyes. We need national change and we need international cooperation. So when I think of ingenuity, you can think of it as technology maybe. I think of ingenuity is, can our species figure out that we have to face reality and we have to cooperate. Now, Braver Angels shows ingenuity. in terms of bringing people together to solve problems. I said I had substantial agreement with Bruce, and the reason for that is I am a member of the Citizens Climate Lobby. And if you don't know about the Citizens Climate Lobby, we promote a carbon fee and dividend plan, gradual increase in a carbon fee, dividends back to households, a border carbon adjustment, and there are other aspects to it. But it is bipartisan, it is market-based, and it will promote international cooperation. Everybody can get involved. You can work individually at the local level, you can work at your community level, you can work at the state level, you can work at the national level. So I just want to say, get involved. We can solve this. It takes ingenuity, but it's the kind of ingenuity that Braver Angels demonstrates and that the Citizens Climate Lobby demonstrates. Thank you very much.
And the speaker is thanked, and looking for a question. Karl Zeller, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi, thank you. Chairman, could you ask the speaker, greenhouse gas theory points to carbon dioxide and methane, and most of the action being taken is against the, or trying to alleviate the carbon dioxide problem. What if the warming that we've experienced since 1979, what if that turns out to be a natural phenomenon? What actions would you still continue to take, and what would you not take?
Okay, I would urge, thank you for the question. I would encourage you to read.
The questioner.
I would encourage the questioner, thank you, Mr. Chairman, to read a new book by Catherine Hayhoe. She is an evangelical Christian. She teaches at Texas A&M, and she has a response to the question of natural change. That question has been looked at scientifically. If you look at her explanation, I think you will see that natural change cannot be an explanation for the kinds of global warming, the kind of global warming that we have seen that is scientifically demonstrable. And I hope that answers your question. It's just that cannot be an explanation for what has happened.
And again, I remind people, we speak of people in the third person and avoid referring to you. So I just would like to remind folks of that. So to take an additional question for the speaker, Susan Baird Joshi, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank the speaker for his comment on the carbon price. And Mr. Speaker, could you please ask Mr. Chair, could you please ask the speaker if he could talk for a minute or two about some of the climate action plan that he said Oberlin, Ohio has. I think that was his community. And just so you know, my dad lived in Wakeman, Ohio, from 40 years. So I'm happy to see somebody from that area of the country. Thank you.
Yeah, please answer with not necessarily a whole speech, but with some brief comments about what the community is doing.
You mean you don't want me to talk for 5 minutes?
I would love to in another forum.
Okay, I am from Oberlin, Ohio. We have a climate action plan. If you Google Oberlin, Ohio and climate action plan, you will see the whole plan. There are a whole variety of strategies that the community is working on. They include clean energy. We have a program to work to weatherize homes. We have a sustainability coordinator who coordinates our various programs. there's really quite a lot involved in it. There are limits to what it will do. A community like Oberlin, I think there's very little that we can do to change individual behavior when it comes to homes. I think there's very little we can do to encourage people to adopt electric cars or hybrid cars. But a national policy that sets a clear goal that indicates where we're going, and if it is a steadily increasing carbon price that does not harm moderate to lower income people and gives everybody the choice to make change over time, and where we all understand where we're going, that will do the kinds of things that individual community climate action plans cannot do. So at Oberlin, we will work on solar, we will work on weatherization, we just adopted a policy for managing food waste to generate compost. And this will keep reduced methane emissions from food waste. So I encourage you to just Google that, look at that. Those are the kinds of things that local communities can work on. But I will just say again, we're not going to have the kind of change either at the individual level, community level, or national level until we can come together in a bipartisan way to establish national policies that we can all get behind. We got to stop the political division, talk to one another across lines of difference, come together and really solve the problem. It is possible, it is not easy, but that's what we've got to do.
And with that, the speaker and the questioners are thanked. We will now go to a 3-minute speech that is primarily in the negative. I believe Harry Boyd, please unmute yourself and give your speech of 3 minutes or less.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would say it's not a negative or a positive. It depends. So I want to make 3 points. First of all, there's a paradigm problem we live with. Bruce Moreland talked about the tragedy of the commons. It was once assumed that the commons resources, whether trees or fisheries or systems of irrigation or many things, were destined for extinction in the modern world. They would have to be taken over by markets or by government. Then Eleanor Ostrom and a team of global researchers found out that wasn't actually true. That what was most important was to shift to a citizen-centered paradigm for sustaining the commons. She wrote her Nobel Prize-winning lecture, and she got the Nobel Prize in 2009 for this research, refuting the inevitability of the tragedy of the commons under certain conditions. Her lecture was entitled, Neither Markets Nor States. Now, it doesn't mean that markets don't play a role, and it doesn't mean government doesn't play a role. But if you think about a citizen-centered approach, that's a different paradigm. Now, 2 other points. One is that I learned this framework, and I saw how it could be brought to life in the civil rights movement as a young man. I appreciated Bess talking about her own background. I grew up in the South. I worked for Martin Luther King's organization. I worked in something called the citizenship schools. I think at the best, Braver Angels is pointing towards citizenship schools, but they were grassroots leadership schools in which people all across the South, regular citizens, teachers, janitors, farmers, sharecroppers, preachers, developed a sense that they could change things. So it goes to Cliff's point that we all are involved. And how do we develop that? Well, it doesn't just happen. People feel pretty fatalistic and more like spectators now than actual agents of change. And I think both the market framework and the government framework, which is pretty much seeing citizens as consumers, feed that. But in the civil rights movement, where people thought segregation was going to last for generations, everyday people developed the confidence and the skill in what was called the organizing dimension of the movement. So this is different than the great protests like the March on Washington. This was local development of capacities. So like Ray was describing in his own plan, but it's thinking about them as a capacity building process across the whole society does two things. One is it develops hope and the sense of agency and community capacity. The second thing, this is really dramatic in the movement, is that it breaks the main way that conventional institutions these days, including the political world, see everyday people, which is in a diminished, negative way, as stupid and backward and not interested in consumers. There's a tremendous amount of prejudice built into our popular culture and the political discourse. And
So,
the third
Gary,
point,
please wrap it up. Please wrap it up.
okay, the third point is that actually there's a policy tradition here. The New Deal, when Roosevelt announced it in 1933, didn't say we're going to do all these things to fix America's problems. He said, we the people have to be involved. And at its best, the New Deal had many policy initiatives like Bruce's regenerative agriculture, the soil conservation district. And today, and I'm going to put this in the chat, there is actually a policy framework that's rich, that has important bipartisan connections, that sees government as playing a catalytic and framing role, but not a driving role. It's called civic environmentalism. The site on the Tufts University site is called Civic Green. I'm going to put that in the chat. But this is a different framework and a different policy and a different developmental civic process that all leads to a different approach.
Thank you. Thank you. And so our first question, Stephen Lumsdain, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Mr. Chair, I would, I guess, ask the speaker how he thinks that kind of framework or mindset would apply to individual citizens of third world countries who feel that first world countries have used fossil fuel to promote them to dominance and destroyed our environment, and are now telling the citizens of those third world countries that they can't use fossil fuels, that they can't use what we did to advance, and how, I guess to be concise, how people in those third world countries might not want to accept kind of this policy or this mindset because they feel they're being cheated of something that everyone else used.
But I certainly don't think that the Northern Hemisphere is lecturing the third world as global South is the right approach. But I think it's also a mistake to think that people in Africa don't understand that there are big problems with climate. I live part of the year in South Africa. My wife is South African. I've worked around democracy issues in South Africa for 20 years, more than 20 years. People know that there's a climate crisis, that there's growing climate dangers across the whole country, from a drought and to fires to earthquakes. So the question is how people in third world countries or global South are going to do it. Thanks, Terry, putting up this. So like America, we have to stop thinking about it as something that the global North is going to do for people or two people, or that the government is going to do for people or two people, and look at creative citizen initiatives and also policies that can back them. So that's a long discussion, but let me just say that the organization my wife worked for 20 years, called the Institute for Democracy in South Africa, played a very important role in the transition from apartheid, had an approach which saw citizens learning and developing the skills of public problem solving is the heart of building a democratic society, and fought mainly unsuccessfully for the ANC government to adapt that approach that would be catalytic and supportive, not pretending to fix things.
Thank you. And our final questioner for the speaker will be Karen Josephson. Karen, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Okay, thank you very much, Speaker, Chair. And my question is for Harry or any of the other science-based people, what is the delay between the emitting of CO2 and methane and all of the other greenhouse gases and the point where it shows up in greater heat and the problems that we see? Because my understanding that is something like 20, 30 years between the point you burn something and the point it becomes a problem for us. And that's something that most people don't address, and I think it's very important.
Well, it's a good question. I'm not going to address the technical side. I can't give you the figures, but I can address the policy side. So we worked with the Clinton administration around citizen-based approaches to overcome the gap between citizens and government. And one of the most creative concepts that was developing in the EPA that actually the Civic Green Initiative at Tufts builds on was called civic environmentalism. The civic environmentalism was a government setting overall standards in consultation with the society and politicians of different stripes for, say, carbon emissions or for water quality or for air quality. But rather than have a regulatory approach imposing those source point regulation, the civic environmental approach said communities and regions should figure out how to reach those goals. And the government provided technical assistance. This was championed especially by the Bradley Foundation and other conservatives. It was a challenge to the expert knows best approach. It was dominant in much of the Clinton administration. And it was eroded because of the customer service language that took over as part of the new public management framework of the Clinton administration, in which citizens were redefined as customers. That continues, by the way. If you look at the Biden Build Back Better, he says it's the New Deal, but he says this is what we're going to do for you. He doesn't say the whole people have to be involved in this. So I think the civic environmentalism addresses this approach directly. Again, the Civic Green Initiative at Tufts has a lot of examples of how this can look on the ground around all sorts of issues, including carbon levels and so forth.
And with that, the speaker and the questioners are thanked. And we are now at a milestone in the debate, which is when we actually formally stand up and stretch. And I really recommend you do it. Remove the posterior from the chair. It does wonderful things. It's good for the body. And we are going to have a poll come up now that's kind of a midpoint poll to ask folks how this is going for you. And as you are stretching, contemplate our change at this point to 2-minute speeches. 2-minute speeches. And just be aware that the event it starts to close out at about a quarter of the hour. And so I just want, people to kind of like get the timeline, understand the timeline that we're operating on. That's where we get into the wrap up. So we do have speeches for about another 20 minutes or so. And so posterior back in the chair for me. If you want to continue to stand up for a while, please feel free to do so. And staff, is the poll up? Are people seeing the poll? No poll. Hello, poll, P-O-L-L, where are you? Well,
So I'm trying to show the poll, and I'll keep trying. So far, I see it, but nobody else sees it. So let's try again.
well, this is the world of Zoom, folks. The best laid plans of mice and men crash upon the screen of Zoom. And you never know what's going to happen.
It was here and it went away.
Lost it.
I see it. Anybody else see it?
Nope.
I saw it and it went away.
There it is again. There it is again.
Hey, somebody just voted.
Okay, it looks like we're going to get a poll.
It's a miracle.
Yes, anytime technology works.
Yeah, I didn't touch anything. It just started working, honest. Somebody was praying, I think.
Either somebody is praying or that is something that is called, I'm forgetting the technical term right now, but lag time. It is a form of lag time.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Yeah.
And the poll is filling in, and we see things taking shape about what people want to see. And well, personal anecdotes, one of my favorites, definitely not gonna get it there today. So it looks like people mostly want ways to cut down on the release of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. Do you want to go ahead and end the poll, Jack? I think we've probably got enough participation, and share the results so that everybody can see it.
I'm looking at the results. Can you guys see them?
I ended it and shared the results.
Okay, so there we are. So we have gotten feedback, and future speakers, you have feedback on what people want. Let me mention, by the way, some people have been chatting to me directly. I don't have time to look at the chats. This chairing thing is actually a pretty busy thing. Please do not chat me directly unless you want to waste your time. It's really not going to do any good. Please communicate through the whips. So we now go to 2-minute speeches. And I see that Shel Horowitz, I believe, has a speech that is primarily in the affirmative. Although at this point, I got to say the speeches are getting pretty nuanced anyway. But Shel, please unmute yourself and give your 2-minute speech.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a both and. The first speaker discussed the human ingenuity part. The second speaker, the need for political will. There is nothing in conflict in those two positions. However, another speaker called for nuclear as part of the solution. And with that, I emphatically disagree. My first book was on why that is a terrible idea. I've seen nothing to change my mind since, and I re-researched it after Fukushima in 2011. The supposed gain from nuclear power could easily be captured by deeper conservation. We have in the United States typically a energy use per capita roughly twice Germany or Denmark or even the UK. If we cut it down to their level, that would be huge. If we cut it down to half their level, that would be even better. And I think we could do that. We have that technological skill. We have that ingenuity. We know how to fix this problem. We also know that more solar energy falls on the earth each hour than is used by all of human activity in a year. We also need to remember that fossil fuels, nuclear, solar, any of it is a means to an end. What we need to do is figure out how to concentrate large amounts of energy, store it safely, and use it cleanly. And if we keep that in mind, that it's an end and not a means and not an end, just like money is a means and not an end, what money is only useful for what it can be purchasing, then we can find solutions. And the big thing is we've got to do it very, very quickly because we should have been doing this for 25 years already. Bruce W. Moreland, I sent you a Facebook friend request. I would love to talk to you. And Rachel Becker, hello there in Israel.
Thank you. Nicely done. Michelle Carr, please unmute yourself and ask your question. I think we'll probably, no, I guess we'll take 2 questions of the speaker.
Okay. My question is why? Why are you so concerned about nuclear? Precisely, my understanding is that they're built on these shorelines. They require water, and therefore they're very dangerous strategically. That's my understanding of why people are against it. But what about the tipping points? Do you agree that there are tipping points like 9 years? And if so, how are we going to do all those things that you say in that period of time? Or are you not concerned about that period of time? So why not nuclear if we only have a few years here?
I'm very concerned about that.
Just a gentle reminder, let's avoid the second person, the use of the word you, and stick to third person parliamentary
Sorry, so
style.
sorry.
No, it's.
I'm very concerned about that time window. That it's way too short, and we've squandered like 40 years of it when we could have been doing much more. Nuclear, first of all, to get a nuclear power plant online takes about 20 years. When you get it there, you have a machine that is producing pollution for 220,000 years that we do not know how to contain. You have a machine that is in danger of catastrophic accident. We have had 3 actual catastrophes that most people know about, another dozen or so that most people don't know about, like Windscale in the UK, Enrico Fermi in Michigan, and roughly 100 accidents in the 60-year career of nuclear power that were kind of teetering on the brink of catastrophe, and lucky for us, stayed inside of it. So it's not safe. It's highly polluting. It's radioactivity. We all know that that's not really good for the soul or the body. I've written a 400-page book on this, so to try to summarize it in a few seconds, I can't really do it justice. If you want to read one thing on this, I would say No Nukes from 1977 is still the best thing out there. I also would be happy to send, if the chair forwards me information of people who want it. I wrote an update to my nuke book after Fukushima that's roughly 12 or 14 pages. I'd be happy to send that, or if maybe I think I've got to post it on my website. I'll dig up the link and put that in the chat.
And thank you. And one more question for this speaker. And I see Steve Haney. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Yes, so Mr. Chairperson, could we ask the speaker about the generation of nuclear that he's referring to? I think that all of his points were about grandfather's nuclear, not 4th gen nuclear that is very prominently advocated by Bill Gates and many others. Now I understand that there's lead time, not a short-term solution, but we're in it for the long term.
Question asked.
Okay, question about to be answered. Yes, I am talking about nuclear fission, not nuclear fusion. Nuclear fusion is not yet in any kind of deployable form yet. Nuclear fission, we were promised, I'm old enough to remember that the Generation 2 reactors, which include Chernobyl and 3 Mile Island and Vermont Yankee, were introduced to solve the safety problems of the much smaller and actually safer Generation 1. So I am not convinced by anything I've seen that Generations 3 and 4 are particularly better than 2. They are still untried. They're still not going to be deployed in time, and they're still going to generate enormous amounts of highly poisonous, corrosive stuff that we have no idea how to store. For longer than recorded history, we have to store it. So it is a very, very troubling technology. It's one we don't need. The book Reinventing Fire by Amory Lovins talks about how to do an economy that is successful and uses neither fossil fuels nor nuclear.
Thank you. Thank you. With that, the speaker and the questioners are thanked. Thank you so much. Moving into our next 2-minute speech. Gene Chandler, I believe you said you had a nuanced position. Please unmute yourself and speak for no more than 2 minutes.
Well, I've been very encouraged at tonight's debate that there were almost 250 people here, that there's been a lot of agreement among the speakers, no matter which side they were on, no matter whether they were conservative or liberal. But I feel very discouraged by the results of COP26. I saw tonight an estimate that with what's been even promised, not delivered, but promised, we would be getting a warming of between 2.4 and 2.7 degrees Celsius, which is just definitely in the hot water zone And I think we're going to have a whole lot of pain going forward. I don't understand why we can't do what Ray English and Bruce Morton said and put a price on carbon. It seems to be such a good idea. People agree on it, and yet very few countries, regions, or states have put a high enough price to keep the polluters from emitting. So I don't understand why we don't have the political will. And I'm afraid that one of the early speakers was right. We're going to just have to get in such hot water that we finally do something out of desperation. I don't understand why humans can't be smart enough to foresee what's happening and do something about it. So I really commend the people tonight, and I wish you were all the leaders of the world instead of the ones we have.
Thank you. Thank you. Beth Holland, would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Thank you. I would like, please, Mr. Chairman, to ask if the person that just spoke is aware that the EU is seriously considering a border adjustment, and wondering if she is aware of that, how she feels that might affect our country in possibly putting a price on carbon.
I'm sorry, speaker, your audio is not coming through. Could you get closer to the microphone? Try that.
I don't know why our country is talking
I'm so
about.
sorry. I'm so sorry. I'm afraid we've lost your audio. I'm really sorry, speaker. I think we're going to have to move on then. So let me see. Catherine Furlani, please unmute yourself and give you 2 minutes or less.
Okay. Yeah, well, I mean, the resolution, as I understand it, was, will human ingenuity will overcome climate change? And I find that I'm asking more, can it overcome climate change? Which I think is very different about whether it will overcome climate change. Because I think some of it has to do with, I do believe that, and my understanding of a broader definition, I guess, of ingenuity has to do with creativity, imagination, being insightful. And so I think that as human beings, we have those resources that we can use. To me, the question then becomes, do we have the courage to, in fact, work to overcome and mitigate the worst things that could happen from climate change? And I think it's more than one area that has to happen. It has to be, I think, a combination of what we do as consumers, what we do as workers and employers, businesses and owners and corporations and policymakers and governments. And one of the speakers previously mentioned something about there needs to be a change. And it raised for me the question of what do we define the value that should undergird everything that we decide to do and how we decide to act, and a speaker previously suggested and pointed to the whole idea of being people-centered. I think we've become a very profit-centered society. And I think that there really needs to be a shift to a people-centered value. And I think if we really center on people and what is it that we as people need, then maybe we will muster up the political will and the courage to do some of the difficult things that need to be done, so that we create, a better environment going forward.
Catherine, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Mhm.
Thank you. So I would like to take, I think I'll just take one question at this point, and I only see one hand up, so I guess that works. Michael Schneider, please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Do you think we're being honest with respect to the United States about the amount of sacrifice that's going to be needed to, really meet any goals?
Mm-hmm.
The country's been restructured for the automobile, and all of that, the sprawling suburbs, the pipes, the electrical grids, all the asphalt, we can't sustain that without consuming a lot of energy. And are we willing to share our cars? Because when you get on the road in your car, I don't care whether it's electric or not, over 90% of the energy is just pushing your chair. It's an extreme waste of energy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And to be clear, what's your question? What's your question?
Question is,
You're all muted.
You're muted, Michael.
Yeah. I think I did get his question. I think his question had to do with sacrifice. And I'm really glad that he raised that question, because I do believe that as individuals, as communities, as a nation, we have to be willing to face the fact that the change that we need to make is going to require sacrifice. And that, to me, in a lot of ways, is the very nature of life. I mean, what do we have if we're not willing to sacrifice for one another? I mean, parents make sacrifices for children all the time. People who do certain kinds of work make sacrifices. That, to me, is a part of what it means to be human. And I think that is a great challenge, because I know I come across people don't want to make sacrifices. We want the easy way out, but so often when we choose the easy way out, we're really choosing a way that does more harm to us than is helpful to us.
And with that, the speaker and questioner are thanked. Thank you very, very much. We're closing in on the end here now, in all likelihood. Might get a speech or two in beforehand. Yale Fighter, I hope I said that right. Please unmute yourself and make your speech of 2 minutes or less.
Okay, hi. I'm speaking from Canada with Israeli accent. I wanted to say something about the root cause of climate change. We talk about climate, we talk about ingenuity, we talk about what we should do, what's the problem, but there is a root cause that causes us to do certain things, use the cars, do those things, and it's more about the consciousness of colonialism. The mindset that get us to this place is that we need more, that what we have is not enough, that what we are is not good enough, and we have to fill ourselves every time with new things. So I do believe in ingenuity, and I think we have amazing minds to create amazing things, and we can fix many things, many problems. But the problem, like if I'm thinking about the root cause, I'm excited to talk. The root cause would be that we keep needing more and more things. We eat too much, we drive too much, we do too much, we do many things too much to compensate our emotions, our traumas, our life, that we're not good enough. So eventually, and the other point is like, we disconnected ourselves from nature and from ourselves long time ago. So this connection, this is why we don't know when we go to the grocery store what we actually eat and all the process. We are so disconnected. Like somebody else builds our house, somebody else makes the computer we use right now, right? Like we don't know so many things about our lives, and this disconnection from each other, that we're afraid to talk with each other, that we're afraid to listen to each other. Like all those things is about the disconnection we see, and I didn't look at the time. And I really like the last person about the sacrifice that you were talking about, because the part of the colonialism mindset is that we want to be comfortable, that life will be comfortable. And we have a head pain, we're going to take a pill because we don't sit with the discomfort and ask ourselves, what's the root cause of that? Maybe I didn't drink enough water even. But it's so easy for us like to look for the fix, the easy fix. And so like to wrap it up, I think this is why ingenuity is like we have, but I don't think it will help eventually. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, thank you. I think that is going to be our last speech, and I think our last questioner is going to be David Sachs.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I wish that you would ask the speaker, please, and thank the speaker for bringing the issues of colonialism and of consumptionism and of the desire for comfort into this discussion as fundamental values and attitudes and processes that are going on. And the question that I would ask the speaker is that if the reverse side of colonialism may be the previously existing or indigenous cultures and ways of life and ways of relating to the earth that preceded colonialism, what cultures or communities or ways of life or ways of relating to the earth might the speaker highlight as being worthy of our attention as we try to transform ourselves from a post-colonial and consumptionist mentality?
I'm not very familiar with like communities that actually do that. I'm a therapist, so I know that if you do some personal work on yourself, you realize that when you eat more chocolate, it doesn't make you really happy, or when you buy a new car, it doesn't make you really happy. So those kind of reflection on yourself, yes, I think that what Native people do is amazing, but I don't think we should go back to different lifestyle. More kind of think about right now, is what I'm doing right now, eating meat, do I really want that? Does my body really need that? Like more kind of reflection. Some people does need that, but how much? And stuff, something like that, like from the therapy side.
And with that, wonderful speech, wonderful question, wonderful response. We are now closing the debate itself. So some things that are coming up, we're going to do our typical sharing of things we enjoyed and learned. And we're going to do a feedback form, and we'll probably manage to send you out with some music. I am looking for a motion to adjourn. Will anybody give me a motion to adjourn?
I move we adjourn.
And I'm looking for a second.
I second it.
The meeting is now, the formal part of the meeting is now adjourned. So let's talk about things that we either learned or enjoyed for a few minutes. General chat should now be opened, so you can put these into general chat if you wish. I'd like to call on some people and hear their voices in the room about something that you learned or something that you enjoyed about this. And if you absolutely hated it, I would prefer that you put that in chat rather than do it verbally. Just my preference. Rachel Becker, something you enjoyed or something you learned? I know you're trying to find that. It can be a bear.
Unmute button on this device. I really appreciated a lot of things tonight. I really appreciated the whole thing, but I would like to research more about carbon fee and dividend. I have a general idea, but I feel like not a very specific one. I'd like to research more about the Citizens Climate Lobby, civic environmentalism. So thank you, all of you who just gave really kind of concrete, active ideas of responses to this. I also love the idea that we can respond on an individual, small community and larger community level. So thank you to those who talked about that.
Thank you, thank you. And again, we're trying to be really brief though in these. Kay Halpern, something you learned or something you enjoyed?
Well, I really enjoyed this whole debate, and I agreed with everything that, not just me, obviously, but everything that every speaker said and with what most of the questioners said. Everybody made excellent points. And I thought the last two speakers made some really wonderful points, like shifting from a profit-centered to a people-centered society. And what Yael was talking about the root cause is this kind of insatiable human need, consume, and we can't continue to consume. So wonderful debate. Thank you.
Thank you. Beth Holland, I'm even going to give you a freebie of telling us where in Northeast Illinois you are.
Oh, McHenry, Illinois, near Rockford.
So learned or enjoyed?
Well, I enjoyed hearing that even if people were in the negative, that they've realized and thought about and heard about a carbon fee and dividend. I know that it's considered by many experts in citizens climate lobby to be the best first step in solving climate change. But and it's a free market decision, a free market policy. But I enjoyed everybody's, even people that felt sort of negative about the human ingenuity, that included imagination and policy, not just engineering. So.
Thank you. Kathy Daniel, enjoyed or learned?
Enjoyed. My partner and I had talked about whether we were going to even tune into this particular debate because climate change was my career. And I thought, oh, I know everything I need to know. And there aren't going to be any experts on this. And so what will we, is this a waste of 2 hours? I think this is the best Braver Angels debate that I have ever witnessed. I think that the speakers and the questioners were so well informed, and they made me think and yell at the end, having us think about consumerism. And they took it in directions I never would have thought. And I also expected to hear a really strong divide between the reds and the blues, and kind of a disbelief in the science. And I thought we decided that if it got to be that way, we would just tune out and, we just leave the discussion. It was fantastic. So thank you to everyone. Good work.
Thank you. Thank you. Cliff Swigit, enjoyed or learned?
I really enjoyed the conversation. And I think that it's for those of us who spend significant amount of time on this issue, it's really inspiring to know that everyone really does deeply care about it. And we're searching for the right path forward. And to just know that we're all kind of working on this together instead of worried about it in our isolated bubbles is very inspiring. So thanks to all. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Thank you. Karen Josephson, enjoyed or learned?
I fully enjoyed the conversation. Every single speaker had something really valuable to give, and this multiple pronged approach is exactly where we need to go. And I loved having that come out throughout the whole evening. And it's so clear that no single silver bullet is there. And it's very clear that we need political action at the national level. And I love that was brought out. So it's just beautiful. And I want to tell everybody that I know about Braver Angels, we need to scale this up so that the whole culture learns how to speak this way. And so it's very exciting. And I'm over involved as a person already working on democracy, because without democracy, I think without democracy, we won't have people involved in like this. So that's what I'm working on, is saving our democracy. But I also have worked on climate for like 20, 21, 22 years. So thank you. I'm just deeply grateful.
Thank you. I would love to give everybody with their hand up a chance to check in. We are really coming up against time though. Melanie G, I think you're going to be the last person who gets a chance. What did you like? What did you learn?
Well, I have an answer for both. I really loved Yael's comments, especially with regards to how colonized we have become, and how that influences the climate and the state of our world. And I learned so much more about just how dangerous nuclear power really is from a gentleman whose name I can't remember. And I hope that we will get to learn what his book is so that I can read it, so that many of us can read it. Thank you so much for this discussion.
Yeah, and before we close out, so if you want to put a resource into chat, if you were a speaker or even not, if you want to put a resource into chat, chat is open right now. Go ahead and do that. And for folks who don't know it, you can save the chat. Go to the 3 dots at the bottom right hand of the chat window, to the top of that menu, and it says Save Chat. So you can save all the resources that have come up here. And oh my gosh, our most beautiful participant yet has shown up on the screen, but we need to move on. And so Jack, please tell folks about Braver Angels and how they can continue to participate in this organization.
You bet. Thanks, Paul. So I'm from Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I live inside what is well known as a very liberal bubble. This is blue country. You live and breathe blue, and it's hard to find a Republican to talk to. So through my participation in Braver Angels, I began to realize that I really need to meet some Republicans, talk to them, find out what they think and why, and maybe even become friends with them. And so I've been eating breakfast at Bob Evans about one Friday morning a month, and I've met people like Peter, who is on this debate tonight, John, who is participating in this debate tonight, and several other good friends here in Chapel Hill. We're very conservative, very smart, very kind people. And it's like a breath of fresh air. If they're no longer the enemy. And so Braver Angels has done a lot of good for me. And I think it's can do a lot of good for the whole country. I'm glad somebody mentioned taking it to scale. I think we have information in the chat about how to join Braver Angels. I encourage you all to do that. It's $12 a year, best deal there is. You can become a member. And there's many, many, many ways to get involved. And I hope you all will.